Welcome to the next podcast of Millinery.Info. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie, and it's so wonderful to have you here with me. This episode of Millinery.Info. It's a podcast series where we welcome milliners from across the globe into our ears and studios. Today I have the honour of having Bronwyn Shooks join me again on the podcast episode. If you haven't had a chance to listen to Bronwyn's first episode, scroll back in the feed so you can get an idea of her background and skills, and then jump forward to hear this one. Bronwyn was the winner of the 2024 Millinery Australia Design Award, and she shares with us the process of creating this stunning piece, as well as a millinery comeback in this episode. Thank you so much to our podcast sponsors for their support of this series: Hatblocks Australia, Louise McDonald Milliner, House of Dawn, The Hat Magazine, Hatter's Millinery Supplies, Lifted Millinery, Be Unique Millinery, Judith M. Millinery Supply House, Hats by Lego, Hat Academy, and Millinery Australia. You can find a link to each of these businesses in our show notes. That's in your podcast app, or if you'd like to jump across to the website. Thank you so much for listening today. If you have a moment, I invite you to show your support of the podcast series and become a sponsor of the podcast. You can head over to our Patreon page. There are 3 tiers available. One is being a podcast sponsor, where you hear the names mentioned. The other 2 are more quieter tiers. One is called A Small Thank You to Millinery.Info, and the other one is called Millinery.Info, You Inspire Me. So if you'd like to sign up and show your support of this series, head over to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/Millinery.Info. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Bronwyn.
Bronwyn Shooks, it's so exciting to have you back on the podcast with Millinery.Info today.
Thank you.
We spoke last in 2018 and you had just won the Masters of Millinery at the Royal Melbourne Show.
Yes.
And we're speaking today because you have won the Millinery Australia Design Award. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And it's an absolute honour to come on the podcast for a second time.
When I was thinking about this, I was thinking, I wonder what she's been up to in the last 6 years. So shall we just jump back when we last spoke in 2018?
Yeah.
Just like highlight through what's been happening. Give us the full rundown.
If my memory serves me, I was alluding to starting a job soon, which I couldn't talk about because I'd signed an NDA. So that show was Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
Just casually. Wonderful.
I think I had actually done initial fittings on, but just couldn't. It was so locked down, I couldn't talk about it at all. But obviously now people know that I worked on it. My name was in the program.
Yay!
So that was great because that took me down to Melbourne every year, a couple of times a year over a 5-year period. So
fantastic.
That's now closed. So if you didn't get to see that, you might have to go overseas. But I've also worked on Mary Poppins, Hamilton and Juliet, and now Hamilton's back for a second time in Sydney.
How amazing. What are you up to on Hamilton? What does it mean when a show comes back for you? What does that involve?
So I did the initial make. I made, I think, nearly 100 pieces when Hamilton originally opened in Sydney in 2021. And during the Sydney season, we actually got closed down because we went into lockdown. So the show closed for 3 months. So that's why they've come back again now to sort of make up for that time that was lost in Sydney. It's only going to be in Sydney. So if you want to see it, you will have to travel. This time around, it's not a complete new make. We do have, there is some new cast and some original cast. So I probably should have counted. I have made some new hats for the new cast members, but also this is my first chance to do a full refurbishment of all of the original pieces that I made. So it's been a big job, but just in a slightly different way. But I really like the opportunity to refurbish my own work or even the work of others, because you get to see what works and what doesn't, how things have stood up, what techniques work, where you might need to strengthen something or, change something slightly to make it last into the future. So because it's back in Sydney, this was the best opportunity that I had to sort of get my hands on everything properly and just give everything a once over. So I'm quite pleased. I think everything has stood up really well.
Great.
Considering they did Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Abu Dhabi, Manila, Singapore, I think.
It's a very long run of 8 shows a week.
It's a long run, and it's also in some very hot and humid countries, which for a felt hat can affect them. So yeah, that's what I've been up to. I have my last Hamilton hat sitting behind me waiting to be finished, hopefully for a fitting tonight.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Nothing like hot off the press.
I live in the theatre right now, pretty much.
When you're doing that restoration and that refresh, are you doing that in your space or are you working within the theatre wardrobe departments or theatre space?
I do it in my space because I need to get stuff back on blocks. So part of my process with Hamilton is really sort of scientifically documenting every single thing. So because a dome block is not this, one dome block is not the same as another dome block. There's slight variations in their shape. So if I need to reblock a crown for a tricorn, I want to make sure I get it back on the exact same block. So yeah, that has to happen in my space because I've got all of the stuff. I have done a little bit of work in the theatre this time. I did some new fur for the King George crown. And I've done a lot of my fittings in the theatre as well. The first round of fittings, they were actually rehearsing at Bangarra Dance Theatre, which is the most beautiful place in the land because you just walk down to the end of the pier and there's the gorgeous harbour view, and you come out at night and you have to go up the end to have a quick look before you go home.
That's like a tough location to go visit.
It's really, really hard. And not all fitting locations are like that.
No, of course.
So when you get a beautiful fitting location, you really have to drink in as much as you can, because quite often it will be a room in a basement in the theatre with no daylight in some random location. I've seen many fitting locations, but that was probably the nicest. Yep. But yeah, we're back to the theatre again now that the show's in the theatre, so it's easier to go to the actors than have them come to me at this stage.
Yeah. What have been some of the biggest challenges in the refurbishment for those pieces?
It's a rolling deadline thing. So early in the process, the costume supervisor gets to choose when and where fittings are. But once they start rehearsals, stage management actually control that. So it's figuring out who you need to fit in what order, and that then determines what you're working on. And then something will come in sideways and you've got to do a reshuffle and you've got to quickly reallocate the priority of things. So that can be tricky because it's rolling deadlines. You're never quite sure what's coming. You may have to pivot really quickly. But that's also what I really love about it as well, because you're on your toes all the time. You've got to be ready for anything. If a cast member goes off sick, their cover has to be on. So you not only have to get the main cast, you have to have the covers ready in a certain order as well. So yes, that's probably the trickiest thing.
That sounds like a logistical nightmare.
And then you might win a design award.
And throw that in the middle of it,
that.
Which we're going to definitely come to because we need to hear about this.
That just,
You also have a bit of a comeback story of 2023, I believe.
Yes, indeed.
What happened?
So on Friday the 13th of October last year.
Oh no, that's a horrific date.
Yes, for someone that's not superstitious, I am now completely superstitious. I managed to break both my wrists, which is just an absolute nightmare. I just keep telling everyone I'm nothing if not thorough.
Yes, that's one
I
approach
did
to that experience.
I did it to the point where I actually needed surgery on both. So I didn't just break them, I broke them really well.
Really good. Yes.
And it was just a freak accident. I literally tripped over on a concrete driveway and just, did the job really thoroughly. So I was in hospital for a week. Because I live on my own, so I couldn't come home with two broken wrists. I could literally do nothing for myself. It's a very humbling injury. You sort of just learn very quickly how amazing people are. And nurses are the very best people. I will not hear any argument otherwise. But the first few days in hospital were probably the worst because I was quite terrified that I'd just ended my career because I didn't know. I knew I needed surgery, but you sort of don't know how bad, I didn't know how badly I'd injured myself, whether it was a case of I'll be lucky if I can use my hands again or, there's lots of degrees in between. So it wasn't until I was literally going in for surgery, and I kept getting bumped for surgery as well.
Oh, that's brutal.
Is so not what you want. But anyway,
your career's just hanging in the balance.
You're just sort of sitting there in purgatory. The only question I asked the surgeon was, will I be able to work again? And his response was, yeah, that's the plan. Which from then on, I sort of thought, okay, it's going to be okay. And he said, I actually think your work will be really good for your rehab as well.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be the case.
Yeah.
But it's sort of, it's quite terrifying to sort of have everything change in an absolute instant like that. And my work is everything. I literally don't know what I would do if I wasn't doing this job. I love this job so much. So, touch wood. Next Friday the 13th, I'm not leaving the house.
Let's wrap you up in cotton wool. Let's get a security team on you. We're not letting anything happen.
Absolutely. It's I do not recommend it. If anybody was thinking of trying, just don't even.
And what is so you've come out of surgery, you've had this life-saving surgeon in a different sense of life-saving, tell you this is all a possibility. What was that? What happened from there?
So it was a really slow recovery. I had to build up my strength really gradually over time. When I was in hospital, I couldn't lift a bottle of water. So that's sort of where I was at. I got home and I had to have paper cups and just everything got reconsidered.
Yeah.
But I worked really closely with the physio team at Royal North Shore Hospital. Shout out, because they are incredible people. And one of my physios actually had a daughter that worked in costume. So when I spoke to her, it gave me so much confidence because she knew exactly what my job was and what it entailed and the really specific things that I needed to work on and do in order to get back to working. So, I worked really, really hard on my physio and it was really, really difficult. It was incredibly painful. There were days where I would be doing my physio and crying because it was so painful. But it's it was two things. It was I have to push through this pain because what's on the other side will be worth it.
Yeah.
And also, how on earth did I get myself into this situation? How? It just, so yeah, it was, I'm not going to say it was easy. It wasn't. It was a lot of really hard work. But that's also where my Easter show entry this year came from. So I made the Queen of Hearts, and there was a lot of hand smocked fabric. So that was very intentionally part of my rehab, that piece, because I wasn't working. Work was pretty quiet as well, thankfully. So I chose something with a lot of fine detail and a lot of hand stitching, because I found that when I was moving, I felt better. Your instinct is to stop and rest and not move, but that actually makes things worse. So I just have turned into this obsessively creating person at the moment.
Because that was different from before?
Well, it will catch up with me at some point, and I will need to switch off and take a break. But at the moment, it's like I don't want to stop, because I don't want to risk never starting again. Or it's one of those weird things. It's an injury that sort of plays with your mind as much as affects you physically. So yeah, all hand-stitched pearls onto the hand-stitched smocking. And I ended up getting first place in a standard of excellence. So that was pretty incredible. I was thrilled. It's the first time I've entered the Easter show. And it was simply because I needed a project, which is what my physio had suggested. She's like, okay, you need a goal. I'm like, okay.
They come up with one.
And that's also where my design award piece came from as well, because I was still building up. I hadn't started on Hamilton yet. I had this little space of time, and I thought, let's do it.
So let's talk design. Like, what an incredible 2023 year to come back into 24. It sounds like as well. Like, what a feat. How long was it between
Phoenix rising from the ashes?
Oh my gosh!
For me this year, it's just like, no, I will not be stopped.
Nor should she. So the design award for Millinery Australia comes along, and the theme is Pearl.
Yes.
How do you respond to this? What happens? What makes you think, I'm entering, this is happening?
I entered because I thought, well, there's a gap. I need to keep working. I need to keep moving my hands. I entered last year for the first time, and actually really enjoyed the process of it. So thought, yeah, let's give it a go again. It was agonizing to start with, because coming up with the concept was one of two difficult points that I hit. Because the theme was pearl, but there was also this sort of secondary background theme, because it's the 30th anniversary of the Millinery Association this year. So it was sort of somehow combining the two of those things together. So my piece is called A Galaxy of Wisdom. So it's a navy blue halo kind of shape that sits on the back of the head, and there are pearls dotted throughout the brim and also on the crown that look like a galaxy. So I thought I might just read out my artist statement for it.
Oh yes, that would be great. I imagine much thought and consideration has gone into this. So
it's as much went into the little bio for it as the piece itself, probably. So A Galaxy of Wisdom. As the Millinery Association of Australia celebrates its 30th anniversary, this piece takes the concept of pearls of wisdom and expands the idea to encompass the Millinery Association as a whole. It celebrates all the generations of milliners who have provided pearls of wisdom with each other that have ultimately created a galaxy of knowledge and support. At times, some stars or pearls shine brighter than others, but this is an ever-changing roster. Everyone has their turn to shine brightly. There are always new pearls of wisdom to discover. So that was that. I had snippets of that running around in my head for quite a few weeks. I knew where I was headed, but to get the sort of phrasing right. And it's, as I said in my acceptance speech, this piece is a love letter to my millinery community, because I've been so very lucky with the people that I've met, getting to work with Jane, like all of these incredible people around me who have shared, you know, tiny bits of knowledge or huge bits of, like, just anything you get from anyone, it all sort of adds up. And I just sort of had this vision of this incredible network throughout the association. So I've got my own network, but then there's the greater network of the association as well. And that's what it's about. It's the sharing of all of these little bits and pieces with each other, that creates community, but it also builds knowledge. So yeah, I really wanted to lean into the anniversary and acknowledge, you know, the importance of community as well. And I also, I thought it was important to acknowledge that the ever-changing roster, it's because it's not always one person all the time. It's different people get highlighted at different times for different things. And that's also the beauty of it, is that it's not about any single person. It's apparently it's about me at the moment, which is just a bit mind-blowing, but anyway, we roll with it. Which is weird because I very intentionally work backstage. I'm a behind the scenes person, so this whole process has been a little bit, pushed me out of my comfort zone a little bit. But anyway, it's amazing. It's fantastic. It's such an incredible honor to win, because I was not expecting to win. So yeah.
It is a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
The detailing, which I just blows my mind. Could you tell us about the pearls aren't just on, but they're in?
Yes.
Talk us through this.
Well, I can sort of give you an overview of the whole thing.
Yes, please.
There were two difficult points with this piece. The first one was coming up with the concept, and I went far and wide with this. I came up with some crazy ideas before I landed on a galaxy.
Pun intended.
Yeah. My feeling was that a lot of people would go for a link to the ocean, which is quite reasonable because pearls come from the ocean. And I also thought pale colours would feature quite prominently across the designs. So in order to stand out from the pack, I decided to not go anywhere near the ocean. I went in the other direction. And I also wanted quite a strong, bold colour. So I feel like I ticked the boxes on those 2 points. I really wanted to lean into the anniversary. And I just really like the concept of pearls of wisdom.
So construction, where did you start? Are you when you're designing yourself, which is something that is, I guess, rare, you're realizing other people's designs, coming up with your own design is something that is an anomaly for you? How did you work through that?
I really tried to come up with something that represented the concepts that I wanted to look at. And it wasn't easy and a lovely process, but ultimately it just kind of came to me in a vision one night, fully formed. Then I knew where I was going. Because I've always loved, there's a scene right at the end of Mary Poppins where the Starlighters come out on stage and they're in their blue velvet suits and caps and they've got stars and crystals all over their suit and cap, and it's just this beautiful representation of the night sky and reaching for the stars. And I've always loved that scene. And yeah, for some reason, I just keep getting drawn back to stars and the sky. I just like that as a concept. So I sort of thought, yeah, I can interrogate that a bit further. But it's that thing of making stars without literal stars. It's sort of making a representation of it. So most of the work of this also was done before I entered, because I knew that I had work coming down the track. So as hard as everything is, I don't want to ever put myself in a situation where I've entered, but I don't know what I'm doing and I'm running out of time. And then you just end up in a world of pain. And I just was not going to have a bar of that. So I got all of that anguish out of the way early. So I actually had most of the work done. I may have talked about this last time. I have a self-imposed rule that I need to use materials that I already have on hand. I think it sets some good boundaries and barriers, but I did actually break the rule this time and purchased one thing.
What was the one thing?
Well, the one thing was my trim. So we'll get to that in a minute. But the felt I had on hand already. The pearls it was actually a bit of pearl fringing that I pulled apart. I had the fabric already. I happened to be working on a custom order that was navy blue. So I was already in the dyeing process already. So all of that I had on hand already. Then the second difficult point of my piece was trimming it, because I did go down the let's make a bow and put it on there. It looked lovely, but I was worried that it just read as a spotty hat and that you might just sort of miss what it was about. So the trim, I had actually left the trim until quite late in the piece. So I had the bulk of the work done. And then I thought, yeah, it'll be easy to trim. Then I just have to pack it, send it, job done.
Done.
And it wasn't easy at all. I'd started to look at the trim about 3 weeks before the deadline, because again, I had started work already. I knew things were busy. I had to I know not to leave things till the very last minute, because you just don't know what's going to come at you.
A lot of good self-control there. Yep.
It's just that rolling deadline thing. You can't do that if you do everything at the last minute. You need to have a lead in order to successfully complete anything. Otherwise, it's not the best situation. So I sort of started playing around with the idea of just keeping it completely stripped back and very simple. At this stage, I didn't have any stars on the crown of the hat, but I ended up adding them in probably the week before. So yeah, ultimately I decided I wanted to use a bit of the unexpected red theory, because red works really well against the sort of midnight blue. It's a little bit of a pop of colour, a bit of interest. I love a bit of whimsy. And so I thought, this hat needs an astronaut floating in space.
Naturally, yeah.
Obviously. So I thought it would be really easy to find a little astronaut. I'd just nip down to Hobbyco.
I've never hunted for an astronaut.
And
what's the process?
Never. So apparently they're not so easy to find, because I needed a certain scale as well, which is teeny tiny. So I ended up ordering it, finding it online, ordering it. It came from Sweden. So this is 3 weeks out from deadline. It was going to take 2 weeks to arrive, and I thought, fine, I'll have a week to get it on the hat.
My heart is racing with anticipation.
Happy days. Everything's great. The astronaut didn't arrive until the day that I had to pack and send it. So it really came down to the wire. It arrived at 11 o'clock in the morning also. Not a nice early start, just let's go halfway through the day. So I had started building my box to pack it, because I thought, well,
this is it.
It's either coming or it's not. But I have to send my entry. So yeah, it arrived. I madly started wrapping the little wire tube and got it on, because then of course you've got to put the lining and everything in, because that can't happen beforehand. So I'm very pleased to say I made it to the post office on time to get it in the post to arrive, meet deadline. But I'm really happy it arrived, because I think it just, from the front, it looks like quite a conservative piece, but I like the idea that when you go and look at the back of it, there's a little something more. And I also added maybe half a dozen teeny tiny crystals in amongst the pearls. So as you walk around the piece, you just get this little sparkle, and it kind of tricks your brain into thinking that the stars are sparkling in the sky. So I really like the layers of intrigue. I don't know what to call it. But I think it just adds a bit of depth to the piece, which, I mean, if you're going to do it, just go for it, I think. But yeah, the pearls, I actually made a pattern of the brim, which I used the same technique that I did for the Hat magazine, issue 96. So if you want to follow it up, go check it out there. But I created a pattern for the brim, because it's much cheaper to muck around and hole punch a pattern than a piece of felt that you've custom dyed. Like, to backtrack on that is a lot more work.
No take backsies on that.
It's no. That's the point where you go, no, I can't do this anymore. It's too expensive. Particularly with the price of felt these days. Felts are not cheap. So to create sort of a realistic looking galaxy, I actually printed out a picture of a galaxy, and I selected 2 pieces of it and hole punched that pattern to create 2 templates to work with, and laid them out around the brim so that it's an irregular pattern, but so that I didn't have to do everything completely from scratch. I had templates that I could top and tail and arrange, so that it's not, because I think that was the biggest thing. I didn't want it to look too orderly and spaced and contrived. It had to look completely random. Once I did that, so I've got process videos that I took that are on my Instagram at the Millinery department, if you want to have a look at the sped up process. I think I managed to film most of the processes involved. I know I missed one or two steps because I just was like, got to get
Focused on
done.
making.
Completely forgot to set up to film.
Hit record.
Yeah. So once that was done, I could then transfer all the markings onto my felt and hole punch them. And each pearl is actually stitched invisibly into the felt. So you can actually see one stitch, which I'm really disappointed about. But that's the human touch, right?
Yes, it's sensational.
But I wanted to do something that I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
I don't remember
this
seeing something.
This is what was to me when I saw it in person. The photos are beautiful by Wendell.
Yes.
The thing that just no image could capture is it's embedded in. How did this? Had you seen it? Talk to me. It just happened in your brain.
Answer. It just happened in my brain. My brain just goes on some strange tangents sometimes. But I really like the idea of being able to see it from the front and the back, because otherwise it's just pearls sitting on the surface of something, which,
yes,
great. But then you don't really get the effect of the stars in a sky, I guess. It's sort of
the feeling is that it's embedded in, and it literally is, rather than it's sitting on the surface, which is not how the stars interact in the galaxy.
Yeah. But yeah, matching them up front and back sitting on the surface would have been a nightmare.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't know where it came from. I think that's the beauty of entering a competition, is it really pushes you to do something different, something that you've not seen before, something that pushes your skill a bit further than where it was before. But I quite like it as a technique. I think it works, really nicely on the brim, in particular, because you can see both. I did end up doing it on the crown as well. But it also means that I had to handle everything very carefully, because once the pearls go in, I can't block that again.
That's it, yeah.
One and done. So it's probably not, I couldn't do something like that for theatre. It probably wouldn't last. Getting worn, 300 times a year or whatever. But for, for a competition piece, I think it worked well. And I also wanted something that photographed well as well, because I know a photo image is a really important part of the process for this competition. So I think I achieved it. I'm really pleased with how it looks. The model is just absolutely beautiful. Everyone involved in the shoot just did such an amazing job. Everybody's pieces, I think, looked really beautiful photographed. So, yeah.
It's amazing. Well, it's so exciting to hear the behind the scenes of that piece. It is stunning. And we will include some photos, but for the detail behind the scenes and the processes, people definitely need to check out your Instagram as well and follow along.
Yeah.
I was listening back to our last discussion, and we were discussing theatre processes, and this is not a direct quote, but we were speaking about how you said about when you run out of techniques to do something or solution something, and then you just basically have to start making things up, and not in a bad way, but in a solution focused way.
Yeah.
This piece sounds like a really good reflection of the innovation that can happen in moments like that.
It's exactly that. That's the only way any one of us is going to get better, is you just need to refine your techniques, invent new techniques, because otherwise we're all just spinning around doing the same stuff, and that's not exciting. It's you've got to push those boundaries a little bit, and there's there are so many things yet to be invented.
Yes.
We just haven't thought of them yet. But yeah, just when you think you've run out of ideas, sometimes that's not an option. You have to come up with completely new ideas. So
Absolutely. Speaking of new ideas and innovations, what else have you been solutioning and working on in your workroom that's pushed that ideas concept and forced you to find new things?
not a lot, to be fair. It's that's the nice thing about going back to work on Hamilton, is it just felt like a comfy slipper. I'd already figured everything out. It's just, I know how that works, so it was nice to settle in. Particularly as that is my first big job back after injury. So I did actually forget to mention, I did actually complete a job with 2 broken wrists in the 6 months after I got out of hospital. Because on the morning of the fateful day, I actually went and picked up some pieces for a film job, and then had to have an awkward conversation with the best designer in the world, who I was basically trying to convince her that I think I can do this, because I didn't have to actually block a hat. I was trimming a hat and making some fabric flowers, and I was just like, if you're willing, I'm happy to try and see if I can still do it. So I managed to do it. Thankfully, they gave me a long lead-in time. But I suppose that really is the biggest innovation, is when you're injured or when you don't have full control over your circumstances, it's incredible what you can come up with and the solutions to things that were never a problem before, but you have to work around. So probably just that whole recovery process was where I came up with most of my most interesting solutions to very mundane everyday problems. So it's I think you do well to just get out and do something completely different, because it just really stretches your brain in some nice ways.
Has it changed your approach to your work coming back from injury?
Yes, I'm much more conscious of how I do everything. I know in the clips that I filmed for making my competition piece, I'm sort of blocking the brim, and I can see it. My hands, like I'm sort of pushing rather than pulling, because I wasn't able to at that point. So it looks a bit weird to me, because that's not ordinarily how I would approach it, but that's what I was able to do at the time. So that's, you make it work. You do what you can, given the circumstances. So, yeah.
Can I ask you what's coming up next?
So at the moment, Hamilton's on stage. There's a Queensland Theatre Company show called Gaslight, which is coming to the Rosalind Packer Theatre this month, I believe.
Yeah.
I made a couple of pieces. They were the first hats that I made after my injury. So I'm quite keen to go and see them on the stage. And I do have a couple of things in the pipeline, but as per usual, I will be able to tell you about them when I'm able to tell you about them.
Well,
but
we'll just have to follow along
theatre,
to see what those might be.
There's lots of incredible theatre out there, so get amongst it. That's what I'd say.
Thank you so much for chatting hats with me again. It is amazing to hear what's been happening for you in the last 6 years. I hope that the next 6 years are busy and maybe not quite as eventful in the same ways, but
I'd be happy if they're completely plain and boring, quite frankly.
But you was
Thank
plain
you
and
so
boring
much
to
for
you.
having me again.
It's been so wonderful. Thanks.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Thank you so much to Bronwyn for joining us again. I hope you enjoyed this discussion with her. Thank you so much to our Patreon podcast sponsors. This wonderful lineup includes Hat Blocks Australia, The Hat Magazine, Hat Academy, Millinery Australia, Hatters Millinery Supplies, House of Adorn, Judith M Millinery Supply House, Hats by Lico, Be Unique Millinery, Lifted Millinery, and Louise McDonald Milliner. You can find a link to these businesses in the show notes, and if you'd like to hear your business name mentioned, jump across to our Patreon page to sign up to become a Patreon podcast sponsor. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie. It's been wonderful to bring you this series so far, and I look forward to talking hats with you again soon.